Hello everybody, today we're going to be doing a screen rebuild on an iPhone 6s Plus. The customer brought the phone in and the home button was missing altogether, so we are going to have to replace that and rebuild the screen as well. Anytime you have to replace a home button, you're going to lose your Touch ID function, so be aware of that. But let's go ahead and tear this thing down and get into it. First, you're going to start with your two pentalobe screws down at the bottom. You use a pentalobe screwdriver. Take those screws out. That way you can push the screen up. And here goes the second screw. Now, you see it disappear from frame. I put it on a heat mat. You can use a heat gun, but I like to use the heat mat. You can also use a hair dryer, but you got to heat up that adhesive so that the screen comes off a lot easier. You can damage components trying to just rip it off with cold glue on there. I take a spudger and slide it around the edges, all the way around the edges, just to cut that glue away. You will lose water resistance once you do this repair, but if your phone's broken, you don't have any water resistance anyway. So you fold that screen back, a little bit more glue to cut away at the top there. There it goes. Comes apart there. Be careful not to rip any cables trying to get through the glue. Fold it up. These two screws here are for your battery connector. Unscrew those two screws there. They take a Phillips screwdriver bit, 000. Once you remove those screws, make that battery connector will unplug. You want to make sure this is the first step after you get the screen open. You don't want to blow your backlight circuit, which can happen if you try to do a repair without removing the screws. Then you have these 5 screws here for your LCD bracket. Your front-facing camera, your LCD connections are under there. Make sure you pattern your screws out. That way you know exactly which hole they go back into. I've said this in other videos. You don't want to put the wrong screw back in the wrong hole. You can cause long screw damage, which permanently damages your motherboard. So you don't want to go from doing a screen replacement to a phone replacement. Make sure you put your screws in a pattern. Don't just dump them in a big pile. That can happen. People just throw them in a pile and forget where they go. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that things go back where they belong. Pop those LCD connectors up with a spudger. Be careful not to rip anything or damage any pins. It's pretty straightforward. And there's your old screen, missing the home button, as I said before. You got 3 screws here. Your front-facing camera assembly, which includes your proximity sensor and your ear speaker under that bracket there. Unscrew those screws and pattern them out on your mat or table or whatever surface that you're going to use to do the repair. Now you're going to want to be careful when removing this assembly here. You'll want to tear the microphone off of the front camera assembly. It's very, very thin piece of ribbon cable that holds that microphone onto this assembly. I usually use a pair of tweezers to get up underneath the proximity sensor and pop that out, because that's another component that can get ripped out. And then I use a flat blade to slide under the adhesive on the microphone to remove it from the screen without tearing anything. These two screws down here would have normally held the home button on. Since the home button is missing, they're not really holding the home button in place, but you do need to reuse this bracket. So still take those 2 screws out and set the bracket to the side so that we have that when it's time to put the new home button on there. Then you're going to have 3 screws down the side on the left, 3 screws down the side on the right, and then a 7th screw up near the top to hold this shield on. The shield protects your screen from the heat that the battery emits. And the 7th screw is right there on the corner up near where the proximity sensor front camera assembly was. And you can remove that shield. And that's it for the teardown of the screen. Now you can just put it all back together. I like to have a nice, neat setup there so you can see exactly which screws go where, what components they go to. If you just dumped them into a big pile, then you're going to have to put together a puzzle that's probably not going to go back together 100% the way it was when it came out. Now when you put your bracket here, you want to make sure all of the screw holes line up. There's 7 screw holes here. You want to make sure they all line up perfectly. If you don't line them all up perfectly, you're going to have to end up taking screws back out and putting them back in and removing them and adjusting. Just make sure before you put that first screw in that your screw holes line up, and you won't have to do it again the second time. Three on one side, 3 on the other, and then that 7th screw up in the top corner. And these are all Phillips screws. Top right, I believe that's on the top right corner. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to replace that home button. I picked up an aftermarket home button right there. You just put the home button in the slot that the original was supposed to be in before, and there's a little guiding pin down there that help put it in place, and then it just folds apart or folds over to the connector on the board, and then you use this shield to hold your home button in place. That way it doesn't fall out of the hole, and 2 screws secured in place. You don't want to go too tight. If you torque them too tight, it can cause the spring not to activate when you press your home button. Your home button can get too tight and then not function. So you want it to be tight enough to hold your home button, but not too tight. And the last step of the rebuild process is to put the front-facing camera assembly back in place. Take your tweezers and pull this film off right here. There's a small slab of adhesive here that holds your microphone in place. I always start with the microphone here on the reassembly process because it's held in place by glue and a guiding pin. And then you can fold your proximity sensor down, and they just slide into little slots like puzzle pieces. And they kind of snap in place sometimes depending on the quality of your screen. And you want to put your ear speaker down. There are screw holes you can line that up with, and then there's 2 guiding pin holes on the front camera. You slide that over the ear speaker, and then put your metal bracket on and slide it into place. It's a little hard to see in this camera angle, but everything is either has guiding pins, adhesive, or screw holes that you can line this up through. So sounds a little more tricky than it actually is. And your 3rd screw there. And that's it for rebuilding the screen. The 6S Plus screen replacement is fairly simple once you get cut through that water-resistant adhesive. You got 3 connectors up here at the top. They just snap into place. I always start with the one to the far right side first. That way it's not in the way when you try to put the other 2 connectors on. Snap all 3 connectors in place, and then you're going to put your little metal shield back in place with 5 screws. Again, this is why we pattern them out in the beginning. That way the screws that are meant to go in the correct holes will go in the correct holes. The top right corner hole has the longest screw. The other ones are not exactly the same size. I mean, some of them probably are, but still want to be careful. But that one in the top right corner is the most important to keep out of the wrong hole. That one is more than twice the length of the other screws, so you don't want to damage your board. And then your battery gets plugged back in, and those 2 screws secure your battery connection. Now you're going to make sure these teeth are lined up properly at the top first, and then along the side of the phone it should snap shut. Those teeth will keep the phone in place. You can feel it snap, and you want to peel off any old glue so that it is not sticking out from your housing to the outside of your screen. once you've got everything snapped back into place, you put your 2 pentalobe screws back down in the bottom. You want to make sure that if you have these screws, you put them back in place. If you don't have these screws, you might want to order some more, because if you drop your phone without these 2 screws in place, your screen can pop out altogether. I've seen the screen pop out and the ribbon cables completely get torn apart. So you want to make sure that these 2 screws are down here at the bottom. And that's it for rebuilding an iPhone 6s Plus. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, like it, share it, subscribe for further videos, hit that notification bell so that if I do post a video, you'll get instant notification for it. And we're going to try and get videos up for each iPhone model. I've got videos in the pipeline that I'm just waiting to do voiceovers for. So stay tuned, guys. Thank you.